Welcome to Elevate Ed for SC, a video podcast series exploring education transformation in South Carolina. I'm your host, Rashonda Pratt. If you believe that it's time to elevate the conversation from traditional reform ideas and move to real transformation, then you're in the right place. In this series, you'll hear success stories of how education transformation is already happening in some South Carolina schools. The vodcast's first season tells stories, raises questions, and looks at solutions, some radical and some right in front of us. We look forward to sharing these stories with you. We're coming to you from the beautiful Kennedy Greenhouse Studio on the U of SC Horseshoe campus. In this episode, we will talk to one of the helping professionals whose work can play a key role in developing the whole child. We will also uncover more about what we learned in an analysis conducted on whole child policy right here in South Carolina. In this segment, we welcome Vernon Kennedy, the Executive Director of Fairfield Behavioral Health Services, and an active member of the Fairfield County community. Vernon's work is directly tied to the whole child approach and how it overlays with what's happening inside the school building. He is joined by one of our favorites, Barnett Berry, one of our regular contributors. Barnett is a research professor and senior director for policy and innovation at U of SC's College of Education. Barnett and Vernon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad that you are here. Vernon, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do in leading Fairfield Behavioral Health Services.
Okay. So I am the executive director at Fairfield Behavioral Health Services, which is an alcohol and drug facility, and we are one of 32 in South Carolina, serving all 46 counties. I'm actually born and raised in Fairfield County, and so it's my home, and so quite naturally I want to make sure that whatever we do in terms of our services, they are benefiting the community and the people that we serve in the community. And
awesome.
So we serve adolescents and adults, helping them with any sort of alcohol and drug issues, some of our young people with behavioral health issues as well.
What's your vision for Fairfield County's young people, and what would you like to see them have access to?
You know, I think my ultimate vision for young people is for them to certainly be healthy, for them to be safe, drug-free, certainly for them to be educated and prosper, but most importantly, come back to our community. Because I think that's a lot of things that we've seen over the years is that young people go off, they go to school, they become prosperous in their careers, but coming back to our community, particularly a small community like Fairfield County, is something that is not always attractive to them. And so I would certainly love to be able to make sure that that happens as we continue to move forward.
What does the whole child approach mean to you?
The whole child approach to me means that putting every kind of resource, every tool at our disposal for not only our young people, but for their families, because it's just as important for their parents to be able to have access to services. And so making sure they get all of those kinds of services that are going to help them be successful and certainly help produce the best outcomes that we can for our young people in their education.
Barnett, you were over there shaking your head, so I know you totally agree with him. And we talked a lot about freeing up folks in the school buildings to work with these helping professionals. What would you want to add to this conversation?
Well, first of all, what Vernon's doing in Fairfield with J.R. Green and the school district is kind of a model for our state of how resources outside the school can become more part of the school. Right. But to accelerate this, we need, I think, some different policies that can also drive better outcomes for kids, but also, I will say this too, Ro, do it at a cost savings. We can actually save money if we put our resources together. But I think what we need more than anything else is, first of all, teachers working more as teams, not as individuals with just a small group of kids. Then we need space for them to work with allied professionals from outside the school, almost as a full faculty, both credentialed teachers as well as those in Vernon's operation. Right. And then we need someone in a school, kind of what we call a community school coordinator, someone who's kind of part social worker, part teacher, part organizer, who can actually bring all those resources together. The good news, everything that needs to be done in bits and pieces is being done in South Carolina. We just need to put the system together.
Vernon, I want to bring you back into the conversation. You listen to what Barnett is saying, and he's talking about the whole child approach requires a whole community to be involved in that. Certainly. What have you seen being boots on the ground and working in the community with that?
You know, I think our partnership with many organizations in our community has been very vital to helping young people and their families. But in particular, we have a coalition called the Fairfield Forward Coalition that is formed with many organizations in our community or many organizations outside our community that serve young people and adults in our community. And we work tirelessly trying to figure out how we're going to help change the impact of negative statistics in Fairfield County. And so that has been instrumental. And I tell people all the time, when folks come to my door for alcohol and drugs assistance, they need more than that. They need us to be able to have access to DSS services, mental health services, jobs, employment, training, those kinds of things. So it is an effort that we always continue to work on, because we understand that that is what whole child means, that is what whole family means, taking care of the whole person and not just that specific thing that they may be coming to your door for. So we pride ourselves in making sure we work together continuously to make sure that we have all the resources, all the services in our community for young people and adults.
Yeah, imagine if some of the folks that work for Vernon were in the schools more.
Right.
And they felt like they were part of faculty, and some of the faculty felt like they were part of Vernon's organization. In some ways, we've already begun to do that, but we need to do it. To do it at scale, we need new policies and new approaches. This is not going to mean that teachers need to do more. In fact, this actually can help teachers do a better job of helping the kids learn the academics, because they're working more seamlessly with those who take care of all those other factors that get in the way of a young person's learning.
What I love about this conversation as well is this whole thought about making sure we retain local talent.
Absolutely.
Having once lived in a rural community, Lee County, South Carolina, I know how important it is to make sure for a community to continue growing,
Absolutely.
keeping our young people there. Do you think that's also a part of this whole child approach, Barnett and Vernon?
Oh, absolutely. In particular, we've already seen in some places where the community school approach, this whole child approach, is taking hold, that many times, even to places where the teacher shortage is, you end up finding talent in the community who are working with young people, maybe in a recreational program or in behavioral health. And the next thing you know, with a Grow Your Own program, we're turning them into a fully licensed, fully prepared teacher.
Amazing.
That's what we can do.
I love that. Vernon, what would you add to that?
I would just say that it is pivotal, because one of the things that we try to help people understand now is that we have to create this culture. Create a culture of everybody working together, everybody having a role in the success of our young people and the success of our communities. And so it's wonderful, as I said, for folks to go off and get training, get educated, be prosperous, have these wonderful careers. But if everybody does that, any community is going to die. And so we know that it takes folks going off to get those kinds of degrees and education and training, but they have to come back. And we want to be able to attract them to come back, because we're doing great work and we're seeing great outcomes in our communities, because we're all working together. It's not one person's job to just be there and help the young person, but there's role for everyone to play.
I love bouncing around these ideas, and you talked about this. Barnett, really quickly, what are some of those tangible things that people can do to make it attractive for young people to stay there as a part of the whole child approach?
Well, I think first and foremost, we've got to give them opportunities to see what they can do. Create more. We need more apprenticeships, something we're going to talk about a little bit later in this segment.
Yes.
And we need more opportunities for young people to be connected to an adult, typically outside the school, that can be their mentor. Those two things, if we create more opportunities for kids to see what they can, the future might hold for them, and also connect them to a really strong adult relationship that can serve as a mentor, can go a long way in achieving success for every child.
Mentorship is so key. Thank you, Vernon and Barnett, for joining us in this conversation on this episode of Elevate Ed for SC. Barnett, we just started talking about the system we have to build to support the whole child. You and your colleagues, in partnership with All for SC and SC Teacher, have released a South Carolina whole child policy analysis. Let's start with defining what whole child policy means relative to students and their families.
Well, first of all, whole child education policy is all about the individual child and how we can build systems of support to advance a child's academic, cognitive, behavioral, mental, and physical well-being. When we focus on all of those together, it's not a distraction to academic learning, it is actually a pathway to success.
I love how you said that. It's not a distraction, but it's a pathway to success. And as a mom of 3, I can see how all of those things play a role in helping them to be more successful in the classroom, right?
Right. But we have too many policies in South Carolina, much like most states here in America, that kind of silo the different people and programs that keep us from driving a more effective, efficient, and equitable system of education. That's what whole child education is. And to build a roadmap for success, we've got to know where we are, because you don't know how to get where you're going if you don't know where you're starting from.
Right. You know, to create a visual for people about this, what I have learned in having a conversation with you and being a part of this vodcast is this whole thought that education does not need to look like a department store, in the sense of we have a child and you keep your emotional needs over here in this department, you keep your physical needs over here in this department, academics in this department, that we need to make sure that we're taking down all the walls. There are no more departments, but we need to bring all of those things to the entire experience.
That's exactly right. Beautiful analogy.
So talk to us a little bit about some of these key findings from that report.
Well, it's going to be hard to do in just a few minutes, but I'm going to do my best. It was about a 167-page report that we put together over about 9 months, looking at over 200 policy documents and about 45 interviews that were conducted. And here's what we basically found, Ro. A lot of good foundations in place in South Carolina, but for example, we have a boatload of student discipline policies on the books. Very little, if any, behavioral health policies. We have some policy that promotes personalized learning, student-led learning, but we have very few policies that really support schools to reorganize themselves, bell schedules, or how we organize teachers with kids to give more personal relationships a primacy in our schools. We have the profile of the South Carolina graduate, which frames out the competencies that every kid needs to develop, those world-class skills. But we have a testing and an accountability system that works against all of that. And when it comes to building adult capacity, we have very little policies in place that encourage our after-school providers, summer providers of learning experiences to work more closely with our K-12 teachers. And we have very little policy to support teachers as leaders for a whole child in South Carolina. And then finally, when it comes to financing, we have a Finance Act that was built in 1977. So 45 years later, we really have only tinkered around the edges of it. And we have very little in place to really encourage different sectors from the public schools, from our social services, from our health services, to begin to braid and blend those resources together in support of the whole child.
What it sounds like to me is we need to update. We need to update our education, because I thought it was really key when you talked about the difference between discipline and behavioral health. Can you go a little bit into that?
Well, yes, we actually have policies on the books that tell schools specifically what to do if a kid does something wrong and what kind of punishments he or she should receive. We have hardly any policies that speak to how do we develop the well-being, the mental and social emotional well-being of young people in order to prevent the kind of maladaptive behaviors to occur.
Well, this gets right into my next question. So from this finding, from this report, what are some of the key recommendations?
Well, first and foremost, as we've said before, there's so many bright spots in South Carolina where elements of the whole child system is in place, but it's just not a system. So first thing we need to do is document those bright spots, make them more well known to both practitioners as well as policy leaders. Let me also add parents and the public. They also need to be more informed about where these bright spots are. That's number one. Number two, we need a better system to track progress around this kind of system of education. We can't just use academic measures. We need a system of whole child indicators to go along with the academic measures. So we need to build a system to measure progress, because if you don't know how well you're doing, how do you know you're making headway on what you want to get accomplished? And then finally, We've got to find some places that are really beginning to do this work and triple down on those efforts, give them the waivers to get away from all the regulations to get in the way, and give them the support to build out their systems locally and show the rest of the state about how to put it all together.
That sounds like a lot of recommendations, and when we listen to educators, they may be saying, this is just one more thing to add to my list. Where do we start?
Well, that's a great question. You know where I would start, and I've seen this work really well in many other instances, both in South Carolina and around the country. I think you start first with educators and community leaders coming together and developing a shared vision. And once they develop that shared vision for what a whole child system should look like, they first need to decide what they do away with. We put too many programs on top of educators. We've got to kind of unlayer that for them and give them an opportunity to rethink and reinvent the system.
So we have to be okay with coming to the table, listening to these key recommendations and looking at what we've already done and say, this is no longer working, we need to get rid of that.
Absolutely.
And have the courage to be able to do that.
Yes. We've got to be comfortable with the fact that the schools of tomorrow may not look like the schools we attended when we were students in those schools.
What's your hope that people will get from this report, these findings?
That everything that needs to be done is being done somewhere already in South Carolina, and there's absolutely no reason in the world that we can't put this system together because elements are already in place. That's first and foremost.
Thank you so much for your passion, and thank you so much for lending to this conversation. Thank you, Barnett. Listeners and viewers, you can find more information about the whole child policy analysis in this episode's show notes. Thank you for joining us today. We've got more lively and engaging conversations like this coming your way this season. If you're a podcast listener, please subscribe through Apple or Spotify, and maybe leave us a 5-star review if you like what you hear. You've been elevated. See you next time. Make sure to connect to elevateedforsc.com for this episode's show notes, stories, and additional research. Follow us on social media at ElevateEdForSC and tell us what you think about what we've discussed today. Drop us a DM or visit our website to shoot us an email. Elevate Ed for SC is a production of U of SC's College of Education and College of Information and Communications in partnership with All for SC and the Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative.